In terms of our news coverage recently, events here in the United States have taken a pretty distant backseat to the events in Japan, at least for the last week. But that is not to say that what was going strong a week ago in Wisconsin is not still going on strong, not just in Wisconsin, but all over the middle of the country. In Washington, it's the same old, same old. Republicans have decided that they like talking about jobs, but what they like doing is waging 1990s culture war, pushing to overrule local control of public schooling in Washington, D.C., voting to defund NPR in the House today, railing against Planned Parenthood and contraception. Contraception, the horror. Pushing yet more anti-abortion legislation, including their latest bill, which is a beautiful reverse toe loop, triple axle, hypocritical message disaster of actually raising taxes in order to make access to abortion more difficult. Now, in Washington, it is not only nothing new right now. Republican politics are so old school, it's like a time machine. Right down to today's headlines about Newt Gingrich still wanting people to think he's running for president, and the way he thinks he's going to get that is by being really super anti-gay. For Washington Republicans, ER and Touched by an Angel just aired their pilot episodes. For Washington Republicans, Robin Williams is still best known for Mork and Mindy. This big shift that is happening in Republican politics is happening not in Washington, it is happening in the states. This is footage from the Michigan State Capitol last night, where thousands of people protested and several were arrested. They were protesting the package of bills just signed by Michigan's Republican Governor Rick Snyder, who is vying with Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker for the Dick Cheney Prize as the Republican who does the most good for Democratic politics, as the Republican who most unifies and mobilizes Democrats and independents and even many Republicans against really unpopular extremism in the Republican Party. Governor Snyder's union stripping, his imposition of what's being called financial martial law to rip contracts and union rights and even local elections away from Michigan cities and towns if Snyder decides to, his massive new taxes on the old and the poor in Michigan in order to give away those revenues to corporations as tax breaks, to not even fix the hole in the budget. This is an agenda that has shocked and galvanized and angered a lot of people in Michigan, just as it has in Wisconsin. I want to show you the headlines that ran in newspapers around the state of Wisconsin on the day that Scott Walker signed the union stripping bill there. Now, this was the day that Walker held his big bill signing, right? This is supposed to be his victory lap. This is what local and regional papers looked like across Wisconsin on the day of Walker's would-be victory lap. The Reporter newspaper of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Did GOP break the law? The Post-Crescent newspaper of Appleton, Wisconsin. Bill passes amid outcry. The Daily Tribune of Wisconsin Rapids. Protesters say fight's not over. The Wausau Daily Herald. More protesters on the way. Thousands from local unions expected to join group in Madison this weekend. And then there was this one. There was this one from the Oshkosh Northwestern. This one may be the single most significant headline of that entire day. Bargaining battle turns to ballot box. That was the headline the day after this big union stripping bill passed in Wisconsin. Bargaining battle turns to ballot box. This is the key. This is the most important thing to pay attention to in trying to determine whether or not Democrats are going to be able to turn the Pyrrhic nature of this Republican victory in Wisconsin into something that both stops what the Republicans are doing here and that exacts a political cost from the Republicans for having done it in the first place. A couple of states over from Wisconsin, in Ohio, Democrats have been under no illusions that they have any real chance of stopping a union stripping bill there because they're so outnumbered by the Republicans in the state legislature. And what Democrats have been saying from the very beginning is if and when you Republicans do this, this is what we're planning on doing. A statewide referendum. You want to pass your union stripping bill? You go for it, Republicans. We're going to let the voters decide what they think of that. This is not an idle threat from the Democrats in Ohio. This is a threat that means something there. The reason Ohio Democrats have been threatening that, and I don't know, maybe the reason why Republicans there are now slow-walking their union stripping efforts there, it's because they know the history on this. The last time Republicans in Ohio mounted this sort of an attack on people who work for a living was back in 1958. Republicans wanted to outlaw union shops with a constitutional amendment that they put before the state's voters. They were just going to roll back union rights. Guess what happened? Ohio voters not only rejected the Republicans' big union-busting idea, they rejected it by a 2-to-1 margin. They overwhelmingly opposed the Republican-led efforts to strip union rights. They also replaced the Republican governor with a Democratic one, and in that same election, they gave Democrats both houses of the state legislature and every statewide office outside of the courts and every single statewide office except for the Secretary of State. Good job, Republicans! Not only did your union-busting referendum get absolutely trounced, you got trounced too. You got voted out of power for having tried it. The anti-union measure that Ohio Republicans wanted back then is not exactly the same thing as what's being proposed now, but it is roughly the same sized, same shaped punch aimed directly at the middle class. And the great majority of working people reacted to it back then, as you might expect. Democrats do not always remember that their base is people who have to work for a living. Democrats do not always remember that the corporate interest party is the other guys, and that they're supposed to represent people who corporate interests would prey on if they didn't have somebody defending them. Democrats don't always remember that. But when Democrats do remember that, they usually reap great electoral reward for it. When Democrats push for economically populist ideas, when they push for things that economically benefit working people, it is the closest thing there is to electoral magic for the Democratic Party. In 2006, Democrats won huge landslide victories in the House and the Senate. Some of those victories were the result of national trends in the country at the time, people being really against the Iraq War, for example. But in a few cases, there was something really specific at work. In the great state of Missouri, for example, Democrat Claire McCaskill managed to unseat incumbent Republican Senator Jim Talent. It was one of the biggest upsets that election night. How did it happen? Well, that Senate race was not the only big thing on the ballot in Missouri that day. There was also a proposition on the ballot to raise the state's minimum wage. Claire McCaskill was quite emphatically for it. Jim Talent tried not to take a position on it at all. There was almost nothing in politics that turns out Democratic voters more than initiatives to raise the minimum wage. And in Missouri, that ended up being great news for Claire McCaskill. The minimum wage initiative passed with 76% of the vote. 76%. And Claire McCaskill unseated Jim Talent. She won by 2.3%. You think people turning out to vote 76% in favor of raising the minimum wage had anything to do with that victory? When the story of that election upset was finally written, here's how it was written. Quote, research showed that Democrats in Missouri were twice as likely to vote for Senate challenger Claire McCaskill, who upset Republican incumbent Jim Talent, because of an initiative to increase the state's minimum wage. That was from Congressional Quarterly. Had that minimum wage initiative not been on the ballot in 2006, Democratic voters probably would not have turned out in the numbers they did, and it is very likely we would not currently have a Senator Claire McCaskill, Democrat of Missouri. According to an analysis by the American Prospect, quote, the minimum wage proposition passed in every county, winning 76% of the statewide vote. The grassroots get out the vote effort mounted by Acorn and labor unions on behalf of the minimum wage initiative helped put McCaskill over the top. And so who must be destroyed? The people who work for the minimum wage initiative, Acorn and the labor unions. Yeah, one down, one to go on that. This is the most potent political issue that Democrats have. It energizes Democratic voters in a way that almost no other issue does. Economic populism. This is the reason the Democratic Party exists. Defending people who work for a living and advancing their interests. Economic populism wins for Democrats every time. If you want a Democrat to win an election, put economic populism on the ballot. Put something like a minimum wage initiative on the ballot. Put Republican efforts to strip union rights on the ballot. And get ready to meet every heroic public school teacher and every firefighter and everyone who ever learned math from that teacher or had their house saved by that firefighter. Get ready for America to hoist Main Street heroes onto the crowd's shoulders. Democrats look at these headlines across Wisconsin and say, yeah, enjoy your signing ceremony, Gov. This is the best gift you could have ever given us. When economic populism is on the ballot, Democrats win. In part because it's not just liberals who support things like raising the minimum wage, it's conservatives too. You don't get 76% of the votes for something with only liberals voting, particularly in Missouri. What happens when Democrats decide to champion the cause of the rights of people who work for a living is that they broaden their base of support. A man named Dick Church from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, is not a member of a public sector union. He is not a Democrat. But here's what he told the Oshkosh Northwestern newspaper the day Republican Governor Scott Walker signed Wisconsin's woe-begotten union stripping bill. He said, quote, public sector workers just keep giving and giving, but they get nothing back. I used to be a Republican, but after what's been happening, I just can't do it. Wisconsin Republicans wrote their union-stripping legislation so it essentially can't be cleanly recalled by the voters as a standalone measure. It is tucked inside a big omnibus budget repair bill, so the Wisconsin state legislature would have to overturn it. And that's why you're seeing all of this energy, all of this mobilization around these efforts to recall the Republican state senators. If Wisconsin Democrats can keep everybody focused on the fact that recalling those senators is how you start to overturn this bill, they will have the tiger by the tail. In Michigan, it's the same story. Expect general election ballot measures to overturn what Rick Snyder and the Republicans have done in Michigan. Maybe even to amend the state constitution to protect union rights for teachers and firefighters and other public sector workers. Maybe even an effort already to recall Governor Rick Snyder of Michigan, already, after he's been in office about 5 minutes. And in Missouri, that minimum wage raise in Missouri that got 76% of the vote, Republicans in Missouri are now trying to vote to lower that minimum wage again. Senator Claire McCaskill just sent out a raise the alarm email to Missouri voters pointing out that Missouri Republicans are trying to do that, trying to lower the minimum wage. She says it's Republicans, quote, taking a 2x4 to Missouri working families, which is both true and has the added benefit of jumpstarting the economic populist divide that drives more animus against the Republican Party and more support for the Democratic Party than anything else in American politics. They will have captured the closest thing to electoral magic that exists in American politics if they can convert these things to the ballot.